Mellow greetings, Yuki Duki, everyone. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig a little bit deeper. And this is our final classic of the season, episode 69.3. And our classic tonight is celebrating its 75th anniversary, the Oscar-winning film, The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts for this evening. And I know I was just in LA on Monday, now back in New York City for a few weeks, back and forth the first part of the year. And I'm in Astoria, New York, the original Astoria apartment. I've done a number of shows here, but none since the Decade in Review back in March 2020, right before fleeing to LA for the lockdown. And I will say, while in this apartment, I've gotten some noise complaints, because I get excited, and I guess the sound is not as good in this apartment. So I'm going to try and be a little bit quieter to appease the neighbors of the people that I'm cat sitting for. I just want to call out once again that Society member Zach Domingo was set to do this review with us, but is still recovering and doesn't feel quite ready to do shows at the moment with us. He is expecting to be back for the Oscar preview in March, however. Meantime, filling in for him is a young student with a crush on an older Society member. Ladies and gentlemen, Kelly O'Malley's here with us.
Hey.
Kelly, thanks for filling for Zach.
My pleasure. Zach owes me.
Zach, oh yeah, he owes you a show or two. Also with us, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest reminds me of a man, and you have to see the movie to get that joke. Jim Carroll's here with us.
Thank you. The man with power?
The man with the power. I don't remember the rest of it. But yes, that's the man. That's the man I was thinking of. All right. I am the man with the power to show you the schedule for this, our 69th series of episodes. How's that for a segue? It started last Thursday with our review of Cyrano, directed by Joe Wright. Continued this past Monday with our Indie Spotlight. Tonight, of course, is the classic movie discussion. And this upcoming Monday will be our 53rd Sound Off. I'm going to have my annual announcement. Devin's going to do his diatribe, and I'm going to count down the top 5 father-daughter films of all time. I saw you had wine there, which is a good segue. I love the segues to who's drinking what. Is that a little red wine?
What kind red wine in my Winosaur glass.
Ooh, what kind of wine?
St. Michelle's Cab.
Is Chateau St. Michel?
That one, yeah.
That's my favorites. That's my favorite winery. I visited it once with an ex of mine. And Jim, did I see you have bourbon or something over there?
You did, yes. That's the bourbon. Here, look, I even have the bottle. So there's Four Roses, small
Nice
batch.
Very good.
Excellent. They owe us some money. I've got Perpetual IPA, which is you can't get on the West Coast. So whenever I'm here, I try to drink it. Second favorite IPA right behind Goose Island, but you can't get it in the West Coast. You can get Goose Island everywhere, so I'm excited to be able to drink it. So here is the drinking slide for those of you that like to participate in that. For you fans, this is some stuff you send into us, things that you drink to when we do them on the show. Anytime I say all-time contrivance, contrived, verisimilitude, or diegesis, anytime Kelly makes fun of Devin, or anytime Jim mentions his kids, that's when you guys are supposed to drink. Cheers.
I have one now?
You have one now. Congratulations. Welcome to the club. Cheers to you guys and also to the drinking audience out there.
Cheers.
Such a good IPA. I'm drinking my left hand tonight. It's just this table. I have more room on my left. All right, it's time for the trivia that I announced in the last classic, which was Psycho. Kelly was with us for that one. The last few years, we've had a tradition of the final classic of the year celebrating its 75th anniversary. Double Indemnity 2 years ago, The Jolson Story last year. Tonight's classic celebrates its 75th anniversary in 2022. And it features the biggest star of the 30s in one of her last film roles. So that was the trivia I gave. And of course, that last bit is a reference to Shirley Temple, who as a child dominated the box office. She worked less steadily in the 40s as she grew older. And this is one of only a comparative handful of films where we get to see Shirley as a teenager. She would make her last film just 2 years later in 1949 before segueing to television for a time. A couple sound-offs ago, we did a top 5 Shirley MacLaine films. Extra trivia, Shirley MacLaine was named after Shirley Temple by her parents. Kind of a fun fact there. Even more bonus trivia for you guys is that this is the second consecutive classic in which we reviewed a film that featured an actor that would later become a U.S. ambassador. Shirley Temple Black, as she came to be known, was the ambassador to Ghana in 1974 and then served as the ambassador to what was then Czechoslovakia in 1989. The last classic we did was Psycho, which featured terrible actor John Gerd as ambassador to Mexico. So we're doing all of these classics that feature former U.S. ambassadors. So Jim, you're the Jeopardy champ. How do you feel about that trivia?
I knew that Shirley Temple Black was a U.S. ambassador. I did not know about Psycho actor being the ambassador.
You guys ready for the summary?
I am ready.
All right, we're going to jump right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. Teenager Susan Turner develops a crush on local artist Richard Nugent and puts him in a bind when she shows up in his apartment to win his affection. To avoid potential jail, Nugent agrees to spend time with the Bobby Soxer to help get her over her infatuation. So, guys, how was that summary?
That was good.
All right.
Yeah,
cool. I do what I can to explain it to the audience and give us a little taste of what we're about to see. So the screenings, the classics this year, we like, before opening thoughts, I like to give the screening notes, sort of report from the screenings that I have that led to our discussion of it tonight. So the screening that we had was here in New York, 2016. The audience at that screening loved it a lot more than I expected. It was one of those screenings where it was just the right movie for the right group at the right time. They laughed the whole time and got really invested in the various infatuations. And that's what they thought about it. Let's see what these guys thought about it. Before I do, had anybody seen this movie before or even heard of it before having to watch it for tonight?
Nope.
Never even heard of it? All right, that should be fun. This is my third or fourth time seeing it. Jim, I'm going to start with you. Opening thoughts, one sentence or less.
A super fun ride.
Jim is getting so good at the opening thoughts. I love it. Kelly has been good from the beginning of opening thoughts because she's learned from her loquacious boyfriend. Kelly, one sentence or less. What'd you think of Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer?
Delightful and funny.
So far, pretty positive. It's funny. I'm looking at my notes for my opening thoughts, and I also wrote the word delightful. I wrote delightfully charming with significant contrivances, which I'll get to. And so I will have slight complaints about that a little later on. But we like to start with a positive on the show. And so I'm going to start talking about the direction from a sort of unheralded director, Irving Rice. I called out the charm just a second ago, and I think a lot of that has to do with the light, breezy touch of Irving Rice. Jim, I think it's almost Lubitchian, if you pardon the made-up adjective. He never gets in the way of the action, but the timing is frequently on point for the comedy that admittedly is not rolling in the aisle hilarious, at least not to me, but never was really intended to be so. I shouldn't have been surprised based on the fact that Irving Rice directed a couple films from our 1942 in review that Jim and I enjoyed. Jim, do you know what Irving Rice directed?
No, what else did he direct?
The Falcon series.
I love the Falcon series.
Right? I was surprised to learn that as well. Kelly's like, what are you guys talking about? But Kelly, when you do your 1986 interview, you'll have all the stuff over Jim, that all these inside jokes that he won't know anything about. You can exclude him then. Back to Irving Rice, I was particularly impressed with the staging of several key scenes that I wanted to call out. A scene where Rudy Valley, as the ADA, comes over to talk to Cary Grant in his apartment. Rice makes Grant busy with his trophy as he tests it in various places in the apartment, adding layers and movement. And then another scene in the final act where the cast all assemble one by one to ruin a date night with birthdays and anniversaries mixed in. The timing in that scene is exquisite and hilarious and fluid, right out of a farce, a masterpiece of comic direction. And then he follows that up with the farcical scene back at the house with door slams, all covered with a subtly moving camera as angry characters move on and off stage, if you will. On top of all that, Rice utilized the mise-en-scène in many different ways to visually explore what I think is the main theme of the film, which I'll get to in the T word, along with some fun visual ideas like the night motif. So I think there's a lot going on here. We talked about Hitchcock, who's sort of this master visual filmmaker. It's not that kind of direction, but in terms of what it's trying to do, the parameters within it's working in, I think Irving Rice's work is particularly strong here.
Both those bits that you brought up, both those scenes were really great. It had like a nice, consistent balance between getting the beats and the comedic timing and like not going too far with it. I felt like I was watching like a play, but one that had been made for film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. I feel like I'm watching a play on stage. You know, I can feel like it's a bad thing, but it sounds like you don't necessarily feel that because it was so dimensional. It was farcical, but in 3 dimensions.
Yeah, I meant it as a compliment. I don't normally mean that as a compliment, but in that case, the ensemble feel and like choreography of it and the busy, like you were saying, like when he was like had all this like physical business in that one scene. I don't think you get that a lot in film, whereas on stage you would almost certainly have that, but it really helped that scene and actually made the scene funny and got the information out.
Yeah. I mean, and some of it is in the writing, obviously, but staging it, the timing, and like the fluidity of it, and a lot of it. And one of the reasons why it may feel theatrical is a lot of it done was in a single take. Because I remember the scene in the house where all the doors are slamming. You're going all around the room, like 360 degrees almost, from one door to another to a staircase and so forth. So even if you do get a lot of that door slamming, idea on stage, it was bigger here somehow, or they used more of the space, and it never felt unnatural to me. I'm with you. I normally, if I say something's theatrical like that, it's normally not meant as a compliment, but here, I think so. And I don't know if I should have looked up if Irving Rice has a stage background. Jim, also a theater guy. I talked about a lot. I talked about Lubitsch. I talked about tone. I talked about the blocking. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think the other thing that he allowed the actors to do was to have moments that were not necessarily scripted, but just to be able to hold on them or go back to them, to have the exchange that wasn't really necessary in terms of the story, but give them the freedom, which made it feel casual and easygoing. The movie's on rails. It has to keep moving, and letting the actors have those moments, like going back to the door slamming scene when the great uncle knocks the chess pieces over and he realizes he's missed one. There was no reason that we had to go back and see him knock the last one, but having that moment there was a great exclamation point to that scene, but also let it breathe a little bit more. We had a little bit more time in that to be able to transition. It made it feel casual, even though we were moving at pace throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's a great example. It's such a small little beat, him knocking that last piece over, but I doubt it's in the script. Like, that to me is an example of great direction. It adds just an extra little teeny layer of detail. It's just it's a small thing, but I think it speaks volumes. There's a Fable Fantasy quality that we could talk about in Screenplay, but those moments ground it a little bit, make it feel a little more real, and it adds to the charm, I think, to some degree. Does anybody have anything else on direction? Anything else you guys notice, whether it be about camera stuff or, we talked a lot about the blocking, or there's any other scenes that you talked about, the chess piece, any other scenes that struck you guys as good in terms of blocking? I only called out 3 of them.
I mean, I love the Cary Grant moving into where he's surrounded by all of the judges and the ADA and the doctor uncle
in the chambers, in
the judges' chambers, where it sort of bounces around the room into his lawyer. He's like, whose side are you on?
Yeah, and he's sort of surrounded by the sharks.
Yes, like giving him time to realize just how far in over his head he is. It's the illusion of choice.
I liked most of the performances. In spite of her age, the most experienced member of the cast was probably Shirley Temple. And I think it shows, especially impressive since Susan Turner is so different than the dimply, cute as button screen persona that she had cultivated over the years. Susan's childish need to seem older and more mature, like a balance that she commits to thoroughly and performs exquisitely. The movie topples if she doesn't sell this character's needs, desires, loves, and tenacity. Not only that, but she's given a lot of tricky dialogue. In some cases, teenage vernacular, and in other cases, more complex stuff due to her being more well-read than her contemporaries, even if she doesn't always fully understand all that she read. The super intelligent girl who's not quite as intelligent and mature that she thinks she is. I think it's wonderful work from Shirley Temple, highly engaging and a large key to the movie's success. And Kelly, let's start with you. Shirley Temple in Bachelor and Bob Saxon.
Oh, she was excellent. I just enjoyed it. I don't have much to say. I just thought she was excellent.
Are you familiar with her work as a child, like when she was 4, 5, 6 years old?
Yeah, I've only ever seen her as a little girl. The ease with which she was just on camera. She was so relaxed.
For sure, and even more so, I felt more character building than those other films. And I mean, I'm not knocking. Historically, they don't hold up as much, the Curly Sue and those other films, The Beck of Sunnybrook Farm, etc. But here, she feels more like an actor to me than she did. She was more like a presence or personality in those other films. Jim, Shirley Temple.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going in line with what you were saying. She had the ability to create a character here, whereas before her character was be cute and dance.
Yeah, and the awe factor was the major draw of most of her movies. And, and here she was given more opportunity, but I was surprised. I was genuinely yeah, she's the real deal. So I don't know. Have you seen her in other films where she's a little older? I certainly haven't.
No. This was. It took me a second when I saw her to be like, oh, that's Shirley Temple.
Now on to the actress that Julianne Moore has called one of her favorites, Myrna Loy. as Judge Margaret Turner. Fresh off the success of perhaps one of her greatest performances in The Best Years of Our Lives, Myrna Loy to me is pitch perfect as the ostensible straight man of the film. There's a precision to all her choices, appropriately less free than perhaps Temple and Grant, but specific and detailed, just perfect for the character. Jim, we'll start with you, Myrna Loy.
Yeah, I think the word precision is exactly right. They're playing archetypes. They're making them their own, their choices, but they're definitely like set characters. Part of the success of the film is that the actors were able to come in and take what they know to be an archetype and then just make it their own and live freely within those choices. Myrna Loy's specificity, the arc of her character that you have, where in the opening scene exactly what the end result of this movie is. Nobody's going to be surprised at the final moment of this movie, but she makes it such a good, nice, even arc where you see the stages of her going through. If there's any directing choice that there wasn't needed, was Cary Grant in the shining armor for Myrna Loy, because you saw it in her eyes before they reversed the shot to Cary Grant.
I think that's important for the T-word stuff that I'll get to.
Yeah, but I think she
agreed. Yeah, you didn't need it if it was just like a regular story, or if it wasn't a callback, it wouldn't be needed. But
yeah, exactly.
I think she has, in a lot of ways, the harder job because she has to play the straight man, but she also has to have this subtle arc that by the end we believe she's fallen in love with this guy. She had to like thread it through precisely so that it landed at the right time and so that we believed it, but we never felt like it was so big that we rejected it.
I completely agree that she had probably the hardest role for a lot of those reasons that we talked about. The straight man is often the hardest role. And so this is a segue to Cary Grant. We can bring it back to Myrna Loy if we can, because Cary Grant is known for a lot of those in more movies than just this. He takes these scenes and sort of like will start mumbling to himself as one of his Grantisms. Even while other characters are talking, he'll just sort of, be mumbling to himself and like a lot of pretending not to be listening to the other character and focused on other things. And that's the same well from movie to movie that he draws his humor, whether it's The Arsenic Gold Lace or The Awful Truth or My Favorite Wife or so forth and so on. Whereas Myrna Loy, bringing it back to her, felt like as the straight man, there's sort of this chaos around her that she is the grounding force for.
Just sounds like a character choice.
For sure. But I mean, like, nailed.
Yeah, like wonderfully done.
Jim, anything on Cary Grant, or if we can keep talking about the Myrna Loy dealer's choice?
I can do both. I think that the end for Myrna Loy is it all wraps up in the given circumstance too. When she talks about her parents and the rigidity which they had, it sort of leads into her that she's made the same choices in life, she's upholding the given circumstances of the script, which is great.
Good job.
Cary Grant's job in this movie was to be charming, and that's what you cast Cary Grant to be.
Well, I mean, for better or worse, by this point in his career, you didn't cast Cary Grant. Cary Grant agreed to be in your movie.
Very fair point. I have never met an artist like the artist that Cary Grant has portrayed in Soxer.
And this is why, I mean, like, I was going to segue to it as one of my negatives about the film. When you get Cary Grant to be in your film, you change your script to adjust for Cary Grant. You know what I mean? Like that's what I felt was happening. It's a guess on my part, but I feel like an educated one based on experience. I do feel like it would have been interesting if there was somebody that was actually, playing a character here, not necessarily, with the same rigidity. Not saying that there's not room for improv. I admit he's a great screen presence, but outside of his Hitchcock films, I don't really love him, except for maybe The Awful Truth. And those Grantisms, his double takes, his eye rolls, his mumbling that I already talked about, it just starts to wear on me after a while. Instead of playing a character, he's just Cary Grant with a different pseudonym in each movie. I don't think you got to talk about Cary Grant so much, Kelly. Did you enjoy him in this?
Yeah, he was okay. I mean, he was good. He was charming, I guess. I was surprised that he was Cary Grant. You know what I mean?
Not yet. I was curious. What do you mean by that?
I was like, oh, this Cary Grant? Like, this is, Cary Grant? He's a movie star. And
I don't know if this
is charming and he's funny.
What you were trying to say. But that's all he ever was. I don't really consider him an actor. I do consider Humphrey Bogart an actor. I do consider Jimmy Stewart an actor. I don't know. I'm talking about his contemporaries. I don't necessarily consider Cary Grant an actor's actor. He did get one Oscar nomination, but The movie he's not very good in at all. Does a terrible Cockney accent in None But the Lonely Heart. The stage presence, to the point that I think everybody made is, or screen presence in this case, is off the charts. Like, oozing charm, akin to what Jim said. I don't think he was an actor, and he had good comic timing from time to time.
I mean, they hired him to be a movie star. Like, they hired a movie star for the part. If they were hiring someone, they wanted like a character, someone who could like do the character work, they would have hired a different actor.
You're right, or the other way around. They changed it to adapt because they got to have Cary Grant in their movie, who's a big
right, and they got the movie made. Or
absolutely,
I feel like, given like I think what we're saying, like that he's more of a movie star than an actor's actor, then I think his performance was just what he was supposed to do.
I mean, like, I guess what I want to say is I would have done it differently. I would have been curious to see what that movie's like as an artist and someone that is impressed with all these other actors like Myrna Loy and Shirley Temple. I would have liked to have seen the version where it's an actor playing a character named Richard Nugent that's a real artist that gets into this situation and has some dimension. I think we're agreeing, just looking at it from different points.
I don't know why. I could like see Michael Keaton doing it. Younger Michael Keaton.
Wow.
And it working and being
a younger Michael Keaton. Yeah, slightly younger.
Like like Mr. Mom, Michael Keaton.
You know who else could do it? Devin Michaels might be pretty good at this sort of role.
Yeah. Guys, he'd be the DA. Come on.
You would not be good at roles. Jim Carroll. Jim, how do you feel about Cary Grant?
I mean, it's everything that I've said. It's Cary Grant is there to be Cary Grant. The movie itself is something that it asks you not to scratch too deeply below the surface.
Yeah.
But the minute that you start pulling on that thread, there's a whole lot that unravels.
I agree, and I'm going to get to that, but I don't think it needed to be that. I don't think it needed to be the House of Cards. You suggested it is. Put a pin in that because it seems like you're eager to talk about that. So I do want to call out some of the other supporting performances, not necessarily talk about their quality, just sort of to connect them to the 1942 in review that Jim and I did. And also, which will affect Kelly soon, in a couple of months anyway. So first, Ray Collins as a meddling Uncle Matt. Jim, did you recognize Ray Collins?
I did, but I couldn't put him in what movie that I saw him in. He's one of those guys, I'm sure he's been in like 900 things.
Definitely 900 things. He's in 2 movies from 1942 in review, one of which you did not see, one of which you did because you named it the best director of 1942.
Miniver?
Talking about the Magnificent Ambersons.
Ambersons. Yeah, Magnificent Ambersons. Okay.
Was also an uncle. he was the senator uncle in Magnificent Ambersons.
We talk about typecasting. I'm sure he's played the uncle in 750 of those 900 things.
He's Nicely Johnson in a movie called The Big Street, also from 1942, which is based on Damon Runyon.
Guys and Dolls, then.
But the same character because it's Damon Runyon. But in the movie, it's The Big Street with Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball. And I mention it because The Big Street, if you've seen Being the Ricardos, is a big part of the narrative for the Being the Ricardos. They mentioned The Big Street, featured Ray Collins. Kelly, you would have seen Ray Collins recently at a CMS.
Oh no! Was he in?
I
know where they take place.
They don't all take place there, but in LA they do.
Oh, okay. At Back to School.
No, that was one of our 1986 films.
That was in 1986.
Citizen Kane. He plays boss Jim Geddes in Citizen Kane, Ray Collins. So,
one of 2 CMSs I've ever been to.
No, you've been to more than that. I feel like you're at my house all the time, so it feels like you've been more to that. You just come after the screenings usually is probably what it is. The other 1942 actor I want to call it is Dan Tobin, who played the lawyer. He was in one of our 1942 films as well. I don't know if you remember him though, Jim.
I'm sure I do not.
Dan Tobin played Katharine Hepburn's assistant in Woman of the Year, who sort of has a bristly relationship with Spencer Tracy, because Kelly is going to play the Katharine Hepburn role when we do our screenplay reading in August.
There is one other performance I thought was fun. Veda Ann Borg.
Oh, yeah.
She was just the right kind of that woman.
Agnes, whose birthday it was?
Agnes, whose birthday it was.
Well, I am going to talk about her because she had one of the best lines in the film, I feel. So I'm going to talk about her momentarily. So I am going to segue to screenplay. So the film actually won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay 75 years ago this year, even though most of my issues with the film relate to the screenplay itself. I think the reason it probably won was the dialogue, because even back then, voters often confused witty dialogue with great screenplay writing instead of being just one element of screenplay writing. And admittedly, I do think the dialogue here is very often smart and witty and fun. There's a combination of legal jargon and the aforementioned teenage vernacular, which must have impressed Oscar voters. And I laugh now and then myself. One of my favorite lines from Agnes herself is, "He stays with you like a heavy meal." I thought that was a really fun line. Myrna Loy says, "I've never been said to so much charm before." Shirley Temple says, "A rose by any color," after the Bluebeard, Blackbeard conversation. Some really, really sharp and funny lines, I thought, throughout the film. My problems with the script is the extreme way in which screenwriter Sidney Sheldon manipulated events to get the plot rolling. The first and most egregious is that the artist that lectures at Susan's school just happened to appear before Susan's sister as a judge. If that weren't enough, why does meddlesome Uncle Matt decide that Nugent is the guy for Margaret without having ever really met him before? That's the impetus for his elaborate plan that we call a plot in this movie. Believable, I suppose, but also very lucky that he's the court psychologist in a very convenient position to help. Once the table is set and the hijinks start to ensue, less discerning audiences tend to forgive and forget these infractions. To me, all the fun exists on an unnecessarily shaky foundation. I want to say it's lazy because another draft or two could have found solutions to those problems, but I know writers in the system were part of a machine and often had deadlines and parameters they had to work in. Regardless, I do think it could have been stronger if anyone had a mind to tighten any of those aspects. It was contrived, if you want to drink to that, and manipulative, but I don't think it needed to be, Jim.
No, I think that's right. It's a movie that, and this is why I described it as a ride at the beginning in my opening thought. They want you to get on and not question anything. The pieces lock together as they're written really, really well. Like they need to just lock this, lock A into B and C and D all the way down the road. The problem comes when you start saying why. Once you start thinking about the consequences of what they're doing or a wider world aspect of it, it stops being fun and it could have been fixed. It could have been if they had another draft. At the end of the day, they wanted this frothy, fast comedy, this farce, and that's what they delivered.
Sure, they delivered it. Just problems could have been solved, like without all the contrivances. Like I feel like it just another day or two. Honestly, I still had fun. Like asking those questions doesn't take away the fun, but I do want to at least acknowledge that the questions are there because I enjoy the film. It could have been better. I think that's my opinion. Kelly, you look different.
Yeah. Oh, I took off my sweater. I got hot.
Well, Kelly, you've always been hot. Anyway, screenplay. What do you think? What we were saying?
For me, the biggest issue was believing that anyone thought it was a good idea for a 38-year-old man to be going out with an 18-year-old or
35 and 17.
35 and 17. Okay. That anyone thought that was a good idea and appropriate, and like for her to take him to like school basketball game, like for them to pretend to be dating was insane to me. It took me having to say, okay, I'm just not gonna touch this because they're trying to do this funny thing.
I was worried about that in the beginning in sort of the same way. And I think they took a lot of pains to dig themselves out of that hole. Thankfully, having Cary Grant be like, no, this is wrong. I'm not dating a child. Are you crazy? Chalking it up to like the overarching master plan of psychology. I was never worried that Cary Grant was actually going to make a move or have real feelings for her because it was so overstated and made very clear that that's not what this movie is about.
I would say that I think the disingenuous part is potentially meddlesome Uncle Matt's ability to convince all those adults that it's a good idea.
Because it was a really bad idea. I mean, this is a person that they don't know.
This was the stated plan of meddlesome Uncle Matt. The actual plan of meddlesome Uncle Matt is if he dates the underage sister, he'll fall in love with the older age sister. If anything, and it's a very thin line, is that it speaks to the people that knew psychology in the late 40s, which was just like Freudianism just making its way after the war in America. Like it was just sort of becoming a thing. And it just speaks to those that had some sort of knowledge of it, could convince people of anything, could use that as a weapon because not enough people knew enough about it. That was the conclusion I drew. It's thin. Like I might have been grasping at straws there, But that's sort of what I went with in terms of like he's using psychology as an excuse for just about everything.
That's exactly what I drew. Like psychology is magic in the same way that, atomic power could create all of these fantastic science fiction devices, Godzilla or Spider-Man or what have you. Radiation is going to be this everything panacea. If you know the underlying psychology, you can almost predict the future or manipulate events to work out exactly as you want them to. And so, yeah, I think you're right.
And that's how I justified it to myself. But it's thin. It's one of the many thin things. Just to sum it all up here, it sounds like you guys are like, yeah, it's thin. It's enjoyable anyway. I think Jim agrees it could have been better. Kelly, do you think it would have hurt the movie if it tried to justify some of these?
I don't know that it would have hurt it, but I don't know that they needed to. The movie still worked.
They could have gotten the same places in more believable ways. I do have a little bit of 6 Degrees trivia related to writer Sidney Sheldon, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of this film. He would go on to greater success as a TV writer in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He created such hit shows as I Dream of Jeannie, Heart to Heart, and one that is connected to Kelly and I in a roundabout way. I don't know if you have any guesses, Kelly.
No.
Sidney Sheldon created the Patty Duke Show, which started 1 year after Patty won her Oscar for The Miracle Worker. The show ran from 1963 to 1966, and Patty Duke is, of course, the grandmother of our mutual friend, Allie Aston, whom I directed in a play with Kelly just this past September. So in a way, Kelly, we are less than 6 degrees connected to Mr. Sidney Sheldon, the writer of this film.
That's pretty cool.
Jim, do you also think that's cool?
I do think it's cool.
Jim, it's time for your favorite segment. What's it called?
Is it the T word?
It is the T word. This is the section where we talk about the themes of the film. Davey used to hate talking about themes, and so we always had to dance around it called the T word, and a segment was born. Here we are, and yes, a film as light as The Bachelor and Bobby Soxer has themes, at least one very large theme. Now, Kelly and I have diametrically opposed ways of approaching theme we learned in the last classic, Psycho. So expect a fight. As I mentioned, the audience of that screening was talking a lot about the nature of infatuation. And I'm mad at myself that I didn't push them towards talking about what I think is the actual theme of the film, a meditation on age. Not aging per se, but the concept of age and the perceptions that go along with that. We often hear the phrase, age is just a number. But more often than not, people don't really subscribe to that, constantly putting people in boxes based on age. The film constantly and quite purposefully blurs those lines. Teenagers and adults swap cars and clothes at various points in the film. It's not only the external stuff, the behavior is constantly shifting as well. Teens are constantly trying to act like adults and seem silly when doing so, while adults find themselves so-called regressing. When they get competitive, for example, and then the kids conspire to let the adults win to protect their ego, the kind of thing you do for a kid. And Kelly already called out a scene where an old man was called out for not acting his age at a certain point. A closer examination of the film, you'll find there's constant references to things like this. The film hammers this home in some subtle ways. Take a look at this photo from the race. Do you guys notice anything about the numbers?
Yeah.
The 2 older guys add up to the younger kids.
The 2 older guys add up to the younger guy.
But also he has the highest number in general.
And he has the highest number, exactly. A super subconscious way of suggesting, in this scenario, the teen is the most mature of the trio. I know that Jim is going to somehow suggest that this was not intentional, but I think it is because of the consistent use of the mise-en-scène in the film to further this idea of blurring those lines of age. And quite frankly, it's exactly the kind of subtle thing I like to do in my work that Jim also doesn't notice when I do it in my own work. The subtlety extends to the casting as well, if you think about it. Of course, Shirley Temple was best known when she was 5 and 6 and made most of her money on the awe factor, as I talked about earlier. But audiences now had to accept her as a sexually aware young woman who's trying super hard to be middle-aged. That's an extra layer on its own. At Rudy Valley as the ADA Chamberlain. Valley was best known as a teen idol in the 1920s. Even though his character is an adult, it's as if he's trying just as hard as Susan to be taken seriously as an adult, overcompensating time and time again. But he can't hide his childish nature in his aforementioned competitiveness or his need to wield power vindictively. And this brings me around to the concept of infatuation again, a feeling normally attributed to youth. Well, I think the film in any way condones the relationship between Cary Grant and Shirley Temple, as Jim sort of suggested. There is a suggestion that it is natural for an infatuation like that to occur. Infatuation is not something we really grow out of, like we are often taught, even today. Margaret is constantly trying to talk herself out of her strange attraction to Nugent, as if the feelings themselves were immature or childish. But perhaps it's time we stop thinking about certain feelings as mature, immature, young, or old, and more as just being human. We don't need to be judgmental about our feelings in that way. We don't need to deny ourselves joy because we're adults. There are those that have suggested that my love of going to baseball games is childish. Why would the happiness I garner from those be limited to those under 18? Now, having all these feelings doesn't mean we don't have to respect the feelings of others. It's how we act on our feelings that make the difference, and that's true of any age. So guys, that's my little essay on age and The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. Jim?
So I'll before I get to what I thought of it, I will preface this by saying I'd really thought about coming in to argue that the theme of this movie was just to see Myrna Loy and Cary Grant get together. That there was no secondary theme, that everything was just, window dressing on a ride. But I give it to you. Yeah, that's actually a really convincing argument, and it's supported in numerous places in the movie. So I like it.
Okay. That I feel relieved now. Everybody get ready. Kelly O'Malley.
I love disappointing you. I agree with you. It sounds great. I didn't have a lot of theme, but it convinced me, and it seems to match my criteria, which is, does the majority of scenes address it?
In this particular film, yes.
You do.
I particularly like when the ADA comes in wearing the kid's clothes because his got wet, like whatever little thing it takes to sort of blur those lines even further, this film took pains to do.
Yeah.
My next theme is more of a sub-theme. It's almost not really a theme, more of like a recognition of a socioeconomic movement. In some small ways, I think the film seems to acknowledge the rise of the teenager as its own heretofore untapped market. 1947 was also the year that Levittown was built, which is somewhat recognized as the first suburb. The rise of suburbia across America opened up minimum wage jobs to those between 14 and 18, and since most of them didn't pay rent or for most meals, the majority of that income was disposable. Whether they were aware of it or not, this gave teenagers a voice and a power in the marketplace that they had not had before. In its own way, I think the film recognizes, intentionally or not, the oncoming cultural tidal wave. It feels like a precursor to the teen films of the 50s, like The Wild One, Blackboard Jungle, and Rebel Without a Cause. Much more serious films, to be sure, but the subset of the group, I feel like, is depicted for among the first times here on film. Kelly, I start with Jim last time, so I'll start with you. The rise of the teenager in The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer.
I'm a little confused.
It depicts the teenager in a different way than films before 1947 had.
Okay.
I think about the things that it makes me think about. So in the historical perspective, I think about how teenagers were depicted as almost their own group, whereas before there was just like kids and adults. I feel like there's this middle section now that there wasn't before, and that would be exploited to much more extent in the 50s and explored, in those other movies like The Wild One and Rebel Without a Cause. Like, this is not the teen angst film that those films are. It's sort of interesting in that way.
I can see that. I can definitely see that.
Jim, I connected this film to Levittown. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think pretty much what you're saying. I don't think they went out of their way, but as maybe like seeing sort of the birth of this cultural zeitgeist of like, oh, teens are a thing.
That's exactly. They recognize them as their own socioeconomic group, which felt different. The question then becomes, guys, so I talked about, like, you guys were coming in thinking, like, what's the theme? Is there like a theme to this film? Like, I don't know. Is it? So I obviously the age one is one that people agree with, and the rise of the teenager more of a sort of like a side sort of almost like phenomenon, recognition of a phenomenon, more of a cultural idea more than anything else. Was there anything else theme-wise that you guys wanted to bring up aside from, Myrna Loy and Cary Grant getting together?
I mean, I think I'm worried that it's easy to pin sort of regressive themes. Like you have a strong, independent woman. Shirley Temple is also kind of strong. I worry that part of the theme of this, and as it was explicitly said by the uncle, what she really needs is a good man. She's a judge. She is well and truly independent. She is still not seen as complete. Maybe it's the tail end of this cultural zeitgeist where women are coming into their own power, especially post-war, where they took on a lot of the jobs that men had. And we're seeing a shifting of this old guard, soon to be the rise of women and move for women's equality.
It kind of brings me back to Woman of the Year, which of course is going to star Kelly O'Malley pretty soon, which also sort of wonders about what is a woman's life without a husband or a partner of that kind. And that film maybe does it in a more sophisticated way. But I will say that to bring it back to the age thing, and maybe it's a feminist thing too, that Myrna's character's reluctance to get involved with someone that's less steady than Tommy, for example, the ADA, I think has to do with it feeling like not adult enough. You're an adult, but it's still okay to feel those things that you normally attribute to schoolgirls. The phrase the schoolgirl crush. So that's what I think was more about than any sort of anti-feminist statement.
Yeah, again, like I don't think they would have consciously been writing that in there. I think it's just in the same way as teenagers. It is something that presents itself due to the norms at the time.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to look at. Like on the one hand, it's progressive in that this woman's a judge and she's shown as successful, and then in the other, it's saying a woman needs a man to be complete. And I mean, we get that, and we still get rom-coms like that today. Like we're moving away from it. It's so entrenched in the culture. Just because she was like precise and like rigid and like dedicated and smart didn't make her like an annoying character.
She didn't need to be a bitch to be successful.
Yeah, like something written less well, like of the 80s, 90s, 2000s would have had her be kind of a bitch.
I would like to point out, though, that even though she's pushed towards Nugent, she does choose him. I don't think she ever bought into this idea that she needed a man.
No, I don't either.
I think other people around her had that idea, but I don't think she bought into that. The film maybe is portraying characters that think that way, but the film itself maybe not think that way.
If the movie was consciously trying to say she doesn't need a man, that would be a different story than what they told. They wouldn't have ended up together.
The thought is you don't need a man, but if you want one, you can have that if that's what you want, if that's someone you genuinely have feelings for. They end up together because she makes the choice.
They ended up together because Uncle Matt figured out where Cary Grant was going and bought her a ticket.
We all know that she did like Cary Grant. I think we're agreed on that. Yeah. She was attracted to him.
If Cary Grant had walked away, she probably would have been fine to go on by herself.
Yeah, I like that. She didn't have to give up her sexuality to be a successful woman. Like she was able to maintain both.
It's less they get together because she needs a man, but they get together because she wants it deep down and was not letting herself have it for one reason or another. The fact that it required Matt takes some of the power out of it, potentially.
Yep.
Good to move on, everybody. Anything else?
Nothing.
What's exciting is no one has ever gone this deep in The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. Torn apart. Cheers to you guys. I love it. Made it to the sound. We basically made Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer sound like Citizen Kane, which brings us to our next segment, which is a fan favorite. It is time for the classic movie Showdown. This is where we pit films head to head in NCAA style brackets. To explain the rules to you, once again, ladies and gentlemen, Kelly O'Malley.
Right. So, number one, seeding criteria varies from bracket to bracket. 2, films at JB hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older, so 2007. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence, and JB is ineligible to vote, but he can break ties.
Even better than the last time, Kelly. Outstanding work reading the rules. Jim was very bad at it when he did it once.
Oh, Jim.
We're in the original screenplay bracket. It's sort of a more recent bracket. I don't think we've done any shows with this bracket before. We may have. I actually didn't look that up. But so we're in the original screenplay bracket. So as I mentioned before, The Bachelor and Bobby Soxer was a winner of the Best Original Screenplay Oscar in 1947. And this bracket is full of films that won the Screenplay Oscar in whatever year they are. And so it's 16 seed in the original screenplay bracket. And Jim, do you know what a 16 seed goes up against in a bracket?
A number 1.
A number 1 seed. It's a tough matchup. In all the years of the NCAA tournament, the 16 seed has won only once. In our movie bracket history, 5 different 16 seeds have won. So it's possible, however unlikely. Let's see what Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer goes up against in the little screenplay bracket. It goes up against The Apartment from 1960, film directed by Billy Wilder. We reviewed it. Jim was on that show. We reviewed it in episode 66.3. So just this past year, we reviewed The Apartment. So Jim, I know you've seen The Apartment because we did the review. Kelly, have you seen The Apartment or did you watch it for tonight?
No, and
Number 16 seed, Bachelor and Bobby Soxer versus number 1 seed, The Apartment. Jim, the vote has already happened, of course. Your vote will not count. I do want to get your opinion, however, having seen both films. What do you think between The Apartment and The Bachelor and Bobby Soxer should move on in this bracket?
What do I think should move on? I mean,
Yes.
I don't think it's even close. Like the Apartment by a landslide. If Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer did win over The Apartment, I think it would be a travesty. I would lose faith in the system. I really want The Apartment to win.
Fair enough. Now, Jim, why?
Just going by the screenplay, right? So that's what we're ranking here.
Whatever your criteria is.
Judging by movies, The Apartment is the better movie. Judging by screenplays, I think The Apartment is the better screenplay. In just what we've discussed tonight with the problems of The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, the screenplay is really meant to reach the objective, and that there are a whole lot of unanswered questions at the end of it. Questions that The Apartment takes the time to really invest in, both through character development, plot development, and really reaches in to be much deeper. Even though it is a comedy in a lot of places, it reaches a lot deeper than Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer ever tries to, for all of those reasons. And we haven't even gotten into the performances and Jack Lemmon. On every level, I think it is the superior movie.
Although we all agreed that Shirley MacLaine was the performance in that particular movie.
I mean, yeah, Shirley. I don't even want to compare the Shirleys.
Although Shirley Temple's damn good in Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer.
Shirley Temple is damn good, but Shirley MacLaine in The Apartment is similarly on another level. But I think that's also given that I don't want to compare their acting talents. That's just given the material and what she's able to do with it.
Well, I mean, I can point the audience to both our review of the episode of The Apartment, episode 66.3, and our top 5 Shirley MacLaine films, which was the episode after, 66.4.
Kelly, I highly recommend it. Like, really.
Well, yeah, she's going to have to watch it at some point. But Jim, thank you very much. Those are reasons. Instead of just saying it's a landslide, I appreciate like that is a full-on essay of why you think The Apartment is better. So now we're going to find out what the winner is. It's a number 1 seed, so it's a heavy favorite here. And so I will now reveal the winner to you, the original screenplay bracket here, 1 versus 16. And the winner is upset. Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer does move on.
No, they're wrong. I don't know who. I'm honestly upset.
Jim just resigned from the society.
I don't know what to tell you. I also disagree with it for what it's worth. Apartment is a top 25 film for me all time. And as I intimated earlier, the audience just fell in love with this film and its infectious charm. As funny as The Apartment often is, it deals with darker elements. And while the audience liked it, it was perhaps too challenging, or at least more challenging. This was a vote for the joy of light entertainment in their eyes, I think. It remains one of the biggest surprises I've ever encountered since I'm doing the classic movie screenings in 2011. It became the 5th 16 seed to upset a 1 seed. So, Jim, you had a pretty visceral reaction that you predicted.
Look, I can't curse, but I want to. If you ran those same movies back to back in 50 different scenarios, that would be the only one where it would be an upset. And I still would love to hear the reasoning behind it.
Well, I mean, I explained what they told me. Like, I listened to the recording. I record the CMSs and I listened to what they had to say. And that's it basically boiled down to like just the pure enjoyment. The lightness of it was more appealing for these particular voters. And to your point, like even in the basketball, the NCAA tournament, the UMBC is the number 16 seed to beat a 1 seed when they beat Virginia. It's the only time it's ever happened. And if they played 100 times, it's the only time that UMBC would have won. But it's the only time that counts. So to that same point, this is the only time that counts when these two matched up on that particular day and that particular screening. The audience fell in love with this other film. I know you haven't seen The Apartment, Kelly, but do you have any thoughts based on Jim's reaction, perhaps?
I'm curious about who you invite to these screenings.
I mean, you know exactly who I invite to these screenings. I invite you all the time. As I said, this is the 5th number 16 seed to upset a 1 seed. The other 4 times it happened are in the following cases. In the bracket for best films not nominated for Best Picture Oscar. Number 16, The Shining, defeated number 1, The Searchers, in that bracket. In the bracket of Indie Spirit Award nominees, number 16 seed Pump Up the Volume defeated number 1 seed Fargo. And of course, that was a bracket we covered in episode 49.3 when we reviewed Pump Up the Volume. In our Westerns bracket, number 16 seed The Missouri Breaks upset number 1 seed Unforgiven. And we did review the Missouri Breaks in episode 25.3. And in our sci-fi bracket, number 16 seed The Truman Show upset number 1 seed E.T. And so those are the other times that it's happened.
Oh, I just really like The Truman Show.
Better than E.T.?
Possibly.
The Truman Show and E.T., I think, is the easiest one that I can see.
That's funny. I always said The Shining and The Searchers is one that
That was going to be my second one, The Shining and The Searchers.
Wait, The Searchers, the 1950-something film with John Wayne?
1956, yep. And that lost.
Really good movie.
That lost. It's top 100 for me for sure. And I like both films, but I'm not surprised, given The Searchers is a Western. It's a more modern Kubrickian film like The Shining beat it.
I've never been able to watch The Shining.
The one I agree with is I'm not a big Fargo fan, so I was actually pleased at Pump Up the Volumes. I do love Pump Up the Volume. I think it's an underrated gem, as you'll see in our review that we reviewed in episode 49.3. Kelly, closing thoughts. Did you have fun tonight? What do you think?
I had fun. I'm happy I got to watch that movie. I hadn't seen it before, and I want to watch more of Myrna Loy. The best years of our lives, what I think would be the place to start, even though she's part of our ensemble there. She's pretty incredible in that particular film. Jim, closing thought.
I'm going to need a lot of bourbon to get over the whole apartment upset. So
would you like me to open my 4 Roses?
There's a special place in my heart for the small batch select. If you have there's small batch, but there's small batch select.
I don't think I have that one.
The yellow one is good.
Now.
We're going to switch this now to a bourbon blog.
I don't have the small batch.
The yellow label, right?
Yeah, the rounder bottle.
If you can, next time, get the small batch. It's everything that you love about Four Roses, but more.
Okay.
This has been the No Name Bourbon Society. I'm just kidding. A little tangent there. It's time for trivia for our next classic, which would be in our 8th season, if you can believe that. So assuming there is an 8th season, assuming we can keep the wheels on this track, just like we have a tradition to end a season with a review of a classic celebrating its 75th anniversary, it's also been a tradition recently to begin the new season with a classic from the year that we just studied. We did Mrs. Miniver from 1942, 4 years ago. We did The Last Temptation of Christ to start off that season 3 years ago, North by Northwest from 1959, 2 years ago. And this past year, we started off our season with Del Topo from 1970 being our first classic. So it seems only fitting that the first classic we review will be from 1986, will also be the first film that we watched as a group together this past June. So Kelly knows what that is, that she's not going to reveal right now. You vlog watchers out there will also know the film I'm referring to. Our next show, however, will be our final show of this season, our final regular season show, and it'll be our 53rd Sound Off, and it'll include the annual announcement that I do on every last Sound Off of the year. We've also have Devin's Diatribe and the top 5 father-daughter films of all time, based on our review of Tony Erdmann, which was our Indie Spotlight. Kids, say goodbye to the audience, Jim and Kelly.
Goodbye, audience.
Hi, audience.
And this was their first show together, I think, guys, so that's kind of fun, Jim and Kelly bonding already. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.